Welcome everybody. Thanks for coming again to one of our wood talks. It's nice to see so many faces, familiar faces, new faces. Great stuff. Thanks. Thanks for dropping in. Ed, if I can hand to you to do some introductions, and then Lian can click the share screen button again.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. I've been lucky enough to be involved with Canterbury Cathedral for coming up for 30 years now. And one of the things that always strike me is actually how much the people involved with the building care and love the church and want to do the best thing by it. And I think the one thing that makes that possible is really the collaboration, which is why I'm particularly pleased to introduce a special 3-for-1 offer tonight of Lian, Joel and Sarah. Lian is an architect and assistant to Joe Deeming, the surveyor to the fabric at Canterbury, and works for Purcell Architects. Joel is the lead carpenter for the works at Canterbury for Dolmen Conservation, and Sarah Tattersall is my colleague conservation engineer at the Morton Partnership. So I think actually having 3 different disciplines like this all talking together on one subject is a really positive thing, and again just shows the extent of collaboration that always seems to actually pervade at Canterbury Cathedral. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Lian.
Thanks, Ed, for that intro. Very much appreciated. I think you've done a great summary there, and that's actually allowed me to cut my bit short by several minutes. So thanks for that. That's really good. And I think just to reinforce what Ed said, you know, Joel and I sitting here today, we've both been on site today. Our office, Purcell here, is within the cathedral precinct. So we're sitting upstairs in my office at the moment with the cathedral sort of right behind us. So it's easy to do a survey from here. I am going to try to share screen now in the usual. There we go. There's the transept roof. So just a very brief overview of what we're going to cover today. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction about the Canterbury journey, and actually some of the other roof works that we've been doing in recent times here at Canterbury, really from the perspective of what happens before you get to the actual on-site stuff. So a little bit about kind of background regulation, consent stuff, and the development and planning aspects. And really that we're going to focus very much on the Canterbury journey, because that's been a really huge project for the cathedral over the last sort of 8 years or so. And that's quite a good one to sort of talk through, but there's been various other roofs that we've tackled in the interim as well. So a little bit of that, and then we'll get into details about types of repairs and how we approach those. So first of all, is everybody okay? Yeah, okay, I'm just hearing a bit of background noise. Okay, so a little bit of an overview here on what we're going to look at today. I don't know whether you can see my cursor. Can people see my cursor there? Yeah, okay, good. So a bit of a timeline. So here's the cathedral, obviously in its precinct, and the Canterbury journey works. I mean, the Canterbury Journey project is sort of a major Heritage Lottery funded project, and it got a round 1 pass from the Heritage Lottery Fund in 2014. So I'm saying it kind of started in 2014, but actually it did start before that, because with the Heritage Lottery Fund you do have to do several stages before you get to that as well. But this was really the start of my involvement in 2014, post round 1 application, and the project is still finishing, and it's going to finish this year in October 2022. So there's quite a lot to the project, but if we're focusing on the roof works today, that broadly encompasses, so the nave roof, so that is this central area here. So in the centre we've got Bell Harry, just as a bit of orientation, Bell Harry Tower. Pretty much everything to the west of Bell Harry is what has been encompassed in what we're calling the Canterbury Journey project. So that is the nave in the centre here, the nave aisles down on each side, and the 2 West Tower roofs, and we've also got a little building down here called the Christchurch Gate, which is also part of the project. These other ones to the eastern church are other roof works that we have sort of come on stream and come and gone in, within the same time period, and have had to be sort of leafed in, if you like, amongst the major project. And what we've got here is the choir. So we've done the choir Triforium, North Triforium and South Tribune here. More localized repairs though. The Northwest Transept, that's right here, that's the image you saw at the very beginning, and we've had a repair to do there quite recently. And right now we're in the Trinity Chapel, again doing repairs to the wall plates there, and that has been funded through the Cultural Recovery Fund. So that's down here, and they're just completing right now. So there's been a lot going on to all of these roofs, what I can say. But the stuff to the Eastern Church, I should say, has tended to be more localized repairs, principally at gutters and the odd bit of structure. When I say localized repairs, what I mean there is there's some significant work there, but it's not wholesale re-roofing. Whereas everything on this site associated with the Canterbury journey has been a full strip of the lead work, everything's exposed, assessing everything as opposed to sort of more piecemeal in nature. So that's a little bit of an overview. Focusing down then onto the sort of key aspects of the Canterbury Journey project itself, the bits in green are everything that's encompassed within that Canterbury Journey sort of catch-all. So the number one here in the middle is the roofs that and the masonry that we've talked about. There's a big bit of re-landscaping down here, the Christchurch Gate, this little building over here, the new Welcome Centre, and these ones are various sort of exhibitions in different parts of the building that are also associated with that Heritage Lottery Fund applications. Quite a nice diagram on this side explaining all that. And it's worth noting that the roof work, the stonework and masonry of the upper towers and the clear stories has also been included. So it's all got to it's all happened together really, and it's had to be sequenced in. So there we are. This is what we're talking about today, right now. This view that you see on the right hand side is before the roof work, before the work's commenced. So we're standing at Bell Harry there, looking along the ridge of the nave roof. So you can see it's quite steep. It's quite a large roof. It's about 8 meters length on the pitch. Just to give you an idea of some of the scale of what we're talking about. So this is just a few bullets on the types of things that sort of as architects we do and have to get involved with in order to get a project like this to the point at which it's being built. So you can see there the top one, the NHF development phase. So just for the round 2 development was 2014 to 2016. And that broadly accords with our REBA stages, our Royal Institute of British Architect work stages 2 to 3, which is concept, and stage 3 is up to your consents. Now, for the purpose of the funder, the National Lottery Heritage Fund, you have to have your consents in hand at the point the committee sit to decide on the outcome of your application. Otherwise, they don't give you money. So that basically sets the timetable that you have to work to. And once you've got a successful round 2 grant, then the maximum delivery period is 5 years. So we've had to do a huge amount of work in, covering 1/3 of the cathedral really in just 5 years. So it's been a huge undertaking. We've had a 1-year extension due to the COVID pandemic. So that was the development phase, and the types of things that we're doing in that development phase are the types of things you'd expect. We're doing surveys, we're kind of doing some project planning and condition surveys, fabric phasing surveys, and setting the sort of parameters of what our conservation approach is going to be. And all of that is leading up to applications for statutory consents. So the cathedral is grade 1 listed. The precinct itself, everything below ground is also a scheduled monument, so that needs to be taken into consideration when you're planning any major works. But it's also worth noting that as a cathedral, it has a different set of rules. It's under what we call ecclesiastical exemption. So the process for that is the Dean and Chapter of Canterbury Cathedral are, the client who run and operate the site. As a place of worship, and then above that we have the sort of consenting bodies. The statutory consenting bodies would be the Fabric Advisory Committee, That's a local committee. And then the Cathedral Fabric Committee for England, CFCE, who deal with statutory consents specifically for cathedrals. And so our route through this is always to take the proposals first, once they've got approval from Dean and Chapter, to the FAC, and then with their endorsement, you then go to the Fabric Committee. But normally you've been a couple of times before to, you know, keep people in the loop of what's going on, so there's no surprises. The slightly different thing about this process is the Fabric Committees meet 4 times a year, and the CFC similarly meet 4 times a year. So it's not the same as with normal planning or listed building, where you make an application and then you get a set determination period. You have to meet, you have to hit the deadline of when the committees are going to sit, otherwise it doesn't get considered for another quarter. So those types of things need sort of planning in, and helps to explain a little bit why, you know, these processes can take quite a long time. So the statutory consultees then do become Historic England. So Historic, although it's grade 1 listed, Historic England aren't the consenting body, but they are a statutory consultee to all of the applications that we make to the upstanding cathedral. But they're also a consenting body to the below ground scheduled monument, so it gets a bit complicated. All of that is governed by the Care of Cathedrals measure. So that's a legal framework under which cathedrals are dealt with. And that designates statutory professional advisors. So there's the cathedral architect, who Ed mentioned earlier, and the other statutory role, which is really important for cathedrals, is the cathedral archaeologist. Then the retained consultants here at Cathedral, of course, are Canterbury Archaeological Trust, who tend to undertake all of the archaeological recording here by virtue of their long association with the cathedral. And of course, the Morton Partnership are the retained engineers, as Ed said, for over 30 years. So we've got quite a long continuity of understanding of fabric within this team, which is really, really useful for getting on with stuff and understanding the nature of what's gone before. This is just a little bit about that line of ecclesiastical exemption that I mentioned. So that red line that you see around the cathedral is everything within that line is stuff that is determined by the CFCE or the Fabric Committee. And the green line around the edge of the precinct is stuff which everything within that green line is affected by the Care of Cathedrals measure statutory legislation. So there is, depending on whether it's inside or outside of that line, depends on who your applicant is, which gets a bit complicated at times. But the other thing to mention is, from a significance perspective, as part of the Canterbury Journey project, the Heritage Lottery Fund do require a conservation plan, conservation management plans to be prepared. Now, that can be quite confusing in a site like Canterbury, because of course the Heritage Lottery project, the Canterbury Journey, is only associated with, you know, this part of the church really and the ground around here. Whereas the conservation plan for a site like Canterbury, which is everything in this city wall, it can become quite a large project. So the way that that was steered through is the surveyor recommended a framework conservation plan, which is a more lightweight document, which can talk about the entirety of the precincts. And then there was a more specific one, which then could meet the requirements for the funder for a conservation plan specifically for the area we were working on. As you can see here, the significances are graded by colour, and everything that's pink is of exceptional significance. So that's the highest significance. That means the cathedral and its cloister is of exceptional significance as a whole. But within that, as the sort of professional team looking at all of the fabric, obviously everything in that purple zone isn't of exceptional significance. And we have to make judgments on site based on our knowledge of and our reading of the fabric, because there's hundreds of years of iterative repairs in this building. And so you're constantly making value judgments when you're on site about where to target repairs and intervention levels. So that was the main point I wanted to make about that, really. Canterbury Journey, so our roof scope, we've focused in here on this slide just on the nave roof, just to give a bit more context. So this is the nave roof in the middle, it's about 60 metres. 2 aisles underneath with their flying buttresses intervening, and the top of the 2 towers as well. Again, these photos predate the work, but you get an idea. And this is a view when it was fully covered in scaffold. Well, not fully. We've dropped a couple of lifts off the very top. So our scaffold installations did come to the top of the pinnacles externally. But you can see here the nave roof is entirely under a temporary roof. And then in sequencing terms, we had to get rid of that temporary roof in order to get down to the aisle work, the aisle roofs and the masonry. And this is just a view of the north aisle roof, before we started. This is sort of undertaking surveys in the winter of 2014, 2015. So you can get sort of slight idea of the sort of scale and context we're looking at. So I mentioned Canterbury Archaeological Trust earlier. One of the really important things that we do when we're planning projects is to make sure we understand the phasing of the building. And again, because of that continuity, we have, as a team, we have a really great understanding of, that goes through masonry and timber and all of the roofs that we have. We're fortunate Canterbury's got a great deal of material written about it and an archive here as well. Canterbury Archaeological Trust, though, they undertake our specific building recording requirements. Again, a requirement of our consent. So Rupert Austin, who does this is an extract from the wider report. This is just showing the south aisle roof, which I think John and Sarah are going to talk a little bit more about in a short while. But you can see the phasing, the colours that you see are the phasing of the timbers, where everything in pink is in situ 14th century fabric, consistent with the original building, and the green and the blue stuff is, later repairs that have been added in. And we do that for whether it's masonry, roofs, or whatever. So moving on from that, we then need to undertake condition surveys. It's quite difficult with a roof the size of the nave, because it's huge. And at the time we had to undertake the condition survey work, we couldn't access the top of the vaults or get close to the timber. So we had to sort of do it from the central walkway. We had the benefit of a really detailed digital survey, reflected ceiling plan, which is this one you see on the screen, which showed every rafter, every purlin, as you can see. The nave roof is primarily an 1860s softwood truss Victorian structure. You see a little diagram of it here, but it does have bits of the medieval roof in its purlins and its parts of its wall plate. So they were chopping up the oak there and using it for the smaller sections as they were bringing in the 1860s timber. And this is a sort of drawing that we produce for consent and also for tender. So it's it's not terribly clear on here, but you can see there's bits that are shaded in red, which tends to be wall plates, which we think we're going to replace, and other bits in blue, which are kind of indicating other types of repairs. When we get to site, so that previous, we've got those for stone and all of the aisle roofs, quite detailed. They allow the consents to happen. It allows us to set the parameters for the rate of intervention, and it allows us to describe the way that we approach the different roofs, because they're all different, they all have different ages. But when we get to site, of course, and it allows the cost plan to be prepared most critically. When we get to site, it becomes a lot more like this. So this is a sort of example of, take up that roof plan with you once you're on site. You can see the temporary roof. We're inside the nave roof here. Part of the lead's been stripped off. And it becomes a process, a very iterative process and a very collaborative process, as Ed said earlier, where we're constantly having to, make a cut into a decayed piece of timber and then go back and reassess. So we're constantly revising our sort of instructions, if you like. I should add that these works were done by a main contractor, Coniston, with Dolmen as the lead carpentry subcontractor. The masonry works, on the other hand, are done by an in-house masonry team. So there's a variety of sort of setups of how the works are sort of procured and instructed. So it's quite immediate though, and even on this one section of the nave roof, you can see there's 3 or 4 revisions in different colours, just to keep the information flowing as swiftly as it can. It looks awful, but it kind of works, I think, Joel. It's safe to say. Yeah, it's more the fact that it's already been discussed on site, and this is more of a way of kind of formalising in a way that allows it to progress. But down here you can see a bit of wall plates come out. There's the clipboard on site with the coloured pen. We're scribbling it on, and then we're going back and scanning it in and sending it back out. Everybody can carry on. This is an extract from the nave, similar for the nave for the aisle, the south aisle, but I won't talk too much about that just now, other than to say that this is a lot more kind of original material in this. So our conservation approach is slightly different. And then I won't say too much because Joel and Sarah are going to talk more about this, but one of the things we did find in the aisles is that this arrangement of truss and post and brace and its patchwork of underslung 19th century repairs, when we started to open this up and look at it, we realised very swiftly that a lot of those later repairs had degraded quite a long way. And then we had this thing about making value assessments really comes into play. So from my perspective, it's about how we value each individual piece of fabric, you know, within that broad category of everything that's exceptionally significant. So this is sort of indicating the arrangement, and you can see part repairs have gone on, etc. What we have here was a sort of early version of how we might tackle that, which became that the stuff in blue was the original medieval fabric, and this stuff in yellow is the stuff that we decided we were going to replace. And the benefit of that was that we recognised moving back that the post you've got here is also a Victorian replacement put in at the same time as this partner repair. When we opened it up and found the decay, we talked a lot. It took quite a long time for us to get to a solution, but the feeling was that actually we needed to replace this post because there was a value in getting rid of this failed partner repair, actually, which then meant the post was too short. But that meant that the brace could actually go back into its original mortise up there, but that did mean that we needed to make a new post. The benefit of that is that there is one remaining original post in the south aisle roof with the original detail on it, and all the rest has been replaced. So that one was in quite a lot of trouble. So we were able to reinstate the post in this case to that original detail, which was quite satisfying. And it does mean we didn't do every post, but there's a handful of them there. And it does mean that that detail is now going to be available in the aisle roof for people to see in future. And it does sort of help to set the tone for future repairs if more posts and things need to be done in the future. So I'm going to leave that there as a really brief overview, and I think I'm going to move on, Joel. So
okay,
if you want to go on.
so how do I navigate up and down on the up and down?
You just press that one right there.
Thank you very much for that, Lian.
Oh.
It gave a very comprehensive outline to the activities before the physical nature of actually what we were doing began. So just as a bit of a framing to the kind of problems that we were encountering, this is a bit of 19th century oak wall plate from the north aisle. As you can see, it's seen better days. It's part of a lot of pathology that was discovered because of the nature of the way the aisles have worked and then historically developed problems. But this talk is going to go a little bit backwards and forwards because I'm going to head back to the nave just briefly, because it's got to be sort of slightly a romp through the last 5 years of all the activities. So you'll have to bear with us with those things. I'm just going to close that window if I can. Okay, so this is from inside the nave roof as the repairs were underway. We started off by working, it was literally east to west. And one of the things that's sort of supporting in with Lian talking about this constant reiteration of material, the project itself was under extremely strict time constraints. So it had to develop a pace and be carried out at this constant pace because of the sequencing with other people and other departments and actually just the whole job. And so the nave, because it was its repairs to an 1859 roof, the consideration was given there to the nature of the timbers and the actual pretty marvelous structure. There was less preciousness about the extant fabric than there would have been had it been medieval. And also quite a lot of it, the stuff that wasn't rotten was in really great condition. So we just moved on through it. This is towards the end of the nave, right at the western end, where you can actually see in situ reused medieval material. not only were the purlins and some of the wall plates, but every single common rafter in the nave, of which there were hundreds and hundreds, were all resawn from the medieval oak. So we didn't envy the person that had to do that, or the people that had to do that job back in the 19th century. There's an interesting step detail that had to be, and this was an adaptation as the job progressed, an interesting step detail towards the west end of the nave, in order to for it to successfully weather in behind this coping. Once the structural timber repairs had been completed, the roof was clad in hemlock boarding to accept the lead. And interestingly, research had been made into hemlock, which is the least reactive timber that there is with lead, because historically in places like this, there's a lot of combinations of woods like oak with tannins in, and very bad results for both the lead and the dust that it produces for people that end up having to work there. Right, moving on, back to looking down the nave during the works, giving an idea of the scale of the undertaking. Jumping around a bit, this is the southwest tower roof, which was, it was probably 6 months after the nave was completed. And it was in an astonishingly poor state of repair. Underneath a bell housing was a frame, and it had been leaking for very many years. But the thing that was quite astonishing about it was the absolute lack of carpentry. It was a pile of wood, essentially, and most of it was pretty rotten. We did strip it down to 2 central timbers. This picture is as uncovered, and this is the new structure that replaced it. These are bits of the central timbers and some of the state of decay that they were in. And it did literally get down to 2 viable timbers only. The decision was made to preserve these because it's hard to see from just here, but there are also, what is the date of those steels, Lian?
One of them is a kind of early kind of Victorian riveted steel, the central one, and then there's 2 sort of about 1980s. The bells were reordered in about 1980s, yeah. And those steels are kind of associated with that reordering. So
these old and very fragile timbers were actually being supported on this network of great big steel girders underneath, and the opportunity was taken to use those in order that we could keep the historic timber. Just moving on to a drawing that was made outlining kind of as Lian was talking about, phasing of one of the things about working in the Isles, which is worth talking about at sort of a slightly greater length than some of the other routes, because it contains a huge amount of primary material from the 14th century. And it's a remarkable structure because it's also suffered a huge amount of loss with repairs, well, with the loss of all but one of the original posts. There are repairs in both aisles dating from the 17th to the 21st century now, and it's quite a remarkable thing that as we're going to talk a bit more about the structure, the undertaking to do these repairs historically must have been quite something. But as part of the works, we got to understand the nature of how the aisles are actually originally formed, and this actual hands-on way of completely dismantling something to find out how it's made is perhaps not the wisest way of going about just finding out, but we were obliged to anyway. So yes, we found out, and we encountered, it's because of the scale of the aisles that it's a rather remarkable, it's a remarkably complex structure. And so this is a drawing that was made just to outline the sheer size and complexity of it. And you can see down in this corner a section of it, how it was found, not how it was originally built. So we have the underslung repair that Lian was talking about, the end patch, the Victorian post. Also, in addition to that, the original layout of the aisle roofs it was at least double the longitudinal rafters. And for some reason, it repairs, probably due to economy, all of these much smaller format, almost like purlin rafters, were set in between 2 pairs of every rafter per bay. Oh, sorry. the breakdown of the trusses as they were originally built. And as you can see, this is the detailing of the post that was inferred from the one and only remaining post. And so this is all of the detail that was taken. And interestingly, how the understanding of these structures was formed as we traveled through. Quite a lot of the ends of the timbers around here have gone, hence the replaced posts. And it was only down towards the end of the south aisle, towards the end of the project, that it was discovered that the formation of the principal rafter lying onto the tie beam had this really rather large housed joint, which I hadn't seen before, and it was really interesting to see. It's a very kind of secure way of doing it, but sadly, it may have been part of the reason why the end of these trusses were degraded, because actually it forms quite a big trough in the top of the tie beam. This is the south aisle before work started, and here you can see this is a Victorian repaired post, underslung brace, as if you like. We called these tie beams just because of the position that they're in. They're not really tying the structure together, so we'll just keep calling them tie beams for convenience at the moment. So this is the principal rafter. One thing I don't know if you can see clearly from this picture is that these underslung holding timbers are in different forms in different repairs. They're similar age, but the next bay along, which is probably bay 8 south aisle, can you see that the patch actually extends beyond the medieval brace? So this one, these were easier to deal with because all of this detailing is as was originally formed, whereas these had been dropped down by the 100 mm thickness of this timber here. This is above the last picture. So this is Bay 9 South Aisle. And as when Lian was talking about the fact of not exactly tearing up the drawings when you get on site to start looking at things, there was an element of acknowledgement that there was a lot unknown about what was under the lead in these roofs. And there was a decision made to carry out all of the works on the one trial bay of, as a percentage, a very small percentage of a vast roof. And so we were to undertake everything, until the finished lead in Bay 9 South Aisle. And it proved to be a very valuable experience because unknowingly we encountered like the worst case scenario in the state of the timbers in this bay. And in this marked up photograph, we can see the first 2 trusses. All of the yellow stars are the small purlin rafters I mentioned earlier that had to be released to get to the main 2 structural timbers, which these principal rafters here in turn had to be released so we could assess the state of the tie beam and the subvening post. When we got to there, we then discovered that the trouble just, we can't really zoom in on that.
Well, hang on a sec. Let me see if I can help you out. Sorry, if I just, is that helpful?
Yeah. So just explaining some of the pathology encountered in T5. So we had to raise this principal rafter and the Victorian patch repair at the back. One of the things, I don't know if Lian mentioned it, the reasoning for replacing a lot of these underslung and patch repairs is that there's a flaw in their formation, which they created a pocket in the wall top, which was then underneath the gutter, and it was a natural sump for wood. And so what it had done is that these repairs had been the authors of their own demise, as it were. And the red here indicates the decay that travelled. We could discern that the patch was decayed very, very easily. But the decay down to the back of the post could only be properly established by the removal of the post. And one of the things about this, it wasn't a decision taken lightly because the removal of the post pretty much meant its destruction because of the tightness of the housing of this brace. And so we had to suddenly reassess how many of these posts that we might be doing because we're in danger of blowing the budget, I seem to recall. The expected decay on all of these trusses was at this end, which is into the clear story side, where we had an unusually deep bearing of the tie beam into the masonry, but more of that in a bit. Just going back to the bulk of the work, which is this post and brace assembly. So once we had dug down into it, can we zoom back out? Yeah, sorry.
Right. Okay. Oh, we lost
Back
it.
out
We've
there.
gone too far.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So how have we
Pull that down. There we go. There we go.
too far?
Yeah.
The bottom two pictures are T2 and T5 that after their removal, and you can just about see the state of the Victorian posts. However, the medieval braces that are removed from the posts were in a serviceable condition.
These ones here.
Yeah. Braces there, braces there. So with the drawing that Lian showed you earlier, it was decided that we would refit the braces into a new post that his design had been inferred from T41 South Aisle, the one and only remaining post. We seem to have got it to... Technical hitches. Thank you. So the top example there is one of the newly formed posts with the medieval brace being fitted to it. And we were very fortunate in the amount of detail we had, because the whole thing was just further down the south aisle, and we could infer all of these details exactly from it. So this is T2, this is T5 being made, and the bottom picture is T2 in situ after installation. Moving swiftly on, these are pictures of the pathology to timber we encountered in the North Aisle. Having finished the works, the trial bay South Aisle, which took, I think it was just over 3.5, 4 months, was it? Sometime. It took an inordinately long time to do one of 18 bays.
It will speed up after that, isn't it?
Well, that was the plan. So we moved over to the North Aisle, and we adopted a necessarily bolder approach to the opening up, which 2 bays at a time were opened. And the condition generally of the North Aisle, because it's away from the prevailing weather, was better than that of the South Aisle. However, one big thing that had happened in the past is that concrete gutters had been cast up against the 19th century wall plates, and this is what they did. So top picture is of the first 2 bays open with the intervening purlin rafters, if you like, and the bottom picture is the collection of timbers that were removed, ones with red stars on them, which are hard to see, didn't make it. As the repairs moved on, talking about the rolling sequence of the way that they were conducted, we had to affect the structural repairs, and as we moved, the cladding repairs that followed on. Now, there's an interesting detail in the top part, which is the opportunity was taken to enshrine a further prevention to water ingress, which is giving the whole roof a stepped detail, which both provides better insulation to the top and less of a chance of water getting back up the hill, as it were. And so this was done throughout both of the aisles. The bottom picture is as the North Aisles went, I think within the next 6 months, we finished the whole of the North Aisle. We then moved back to the South Aisle, where we encountered a far greater amount of decay in the first couple of bays, in the bottom pictures of the South Aisle. This is the post that it all came from, as it were. So this is T41 South Aisle, which is in pretty much the penultimate bay. And all of the detail that was used to provide the new replacements was present here. However, it was in quite a lot of trouble when encountered, and it was there was quite a lot of head scratching, shall we say, as to how the repair was best conducted. I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, I think, to Can we stop the sharing then? To talk about T41.
Oh, I think you need to keep sharing. I'm afraid if you've got my slide next.
Sorry.
It's all going so well. See if I can get that back. Okay.
Next picture.
Are you that thing? Does that come back?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
That. Oh, gone too far.
Gone too far.
There we
Yeah.
go. Okay.
Well, I think a lot's been said already about the build up to this and the kind of importance of this, but this was the one and only remaining assembly. So reflecting back to what Lian said earlier about the importance of fabric, this was where we were actually almost kind of the millimetre agreeing where the cuts were going to be made to retain the timber and to lose it. And part of the key details was to retain as much fabric as possible. What that actually meant for us structurally was a compromise. So we were looking at repairs that were generally scarf repairs with the assistance of stainless steel threaded rods, and so full structural repairs at locations that were perhaps not ideal. This one's easier than some, which had to extend way beyond the position where the brace met the tie, but lots of things in the way and a sort of fiddly repair. But the kind of upshot, as has already been said, was to retain as much of the fabric as possible. So this was a detail developed with the three of us sort of poking the post on a number of occasions and gradually cutting back the decayed timber to reveal what we could retain. So where we started, we could clearly see that the back of the tie beam wasn't meeting the wall top with an air gap, the top left picture, and a lot of suspicious dust at the base of the post and feeling behind it a great big void. And again, it's just worth saying we found actually the best way to assess decay before we opened up was actually just simply tapping and using sound to tell us where the pockets of decay were and the hollow sounds. So the repair that we developed was essentially retaining the front of the post that was sound and a new back of the post simply restrained to it. We accepted that we couldn't fully repair the base of it and that there'd be a void left. And there's also a kind of need in the assembly where we developed a detail at the base with a pair of folding wedges to essentially retension the back of that post so that to force essentially the load back into it and off the edge of the corbel where it was being carried at the moment. I think that's all I wanted to say on that, unless anyone's got anything to add.
Can we? Oh, yes. Yeah, we kind of it was kid gloves. It was a very delicate because the post itself was there were lots of things talked about, but one of the peculiarities of the construction, which is also it's a rareness to the scene, is all of the pegs had been wedged post insertion, which meant that there would be it would have been impossible to dismantle this without damaging it terminally. So it was a very tricky repair to do in situ, but it was very enjoyable. Yeah, so if we can move on to, so this is the south aisle with lots and lots of finished repairs in it, which I'm glad to say aren't so discernible. There's scarf repairs to the ends of the tie beams that were bearing into our deep masonry pockets. Very large scarf repair to this from, as I think Sarah just mentioned, some of them went way beyond the underslung patches. This was one of the larger ones. That's a replaced Victorian patch. A detail that we haven't touched upon is that something that was done in the nave repairs that was then used and is still being used throughout the cathedral, and I'm taking it to every project I go to, which is to enshrine a bit of ventilation into the wall plates by raising them slightly off the masonry onto packers of a description. In the cathedral, they've all been slate packers. Some have been folding wedges to lift them on larger gaps, but we seem to have reverted mostly to a 25mm packer, so that they bear the wall plates and keep them off the moist wall tops. One of the reasons that led to this was when we first surveyed the timber in the nave, a lot of the wall plates were actually sitting directly into water from leaks in the roof. And so it's clear that something had to be thought about, at least, for that. Just a very brief note. I had the pleasure of writing about the repairs to the work of the hours last summer, and the anomaly of the construction is a very strange thing, and it was a real privilege to be around to find out a bit more about them, which is that each one of these principal trusses, and we, as having said, they're not called tie beams, they're not actually tie beams, but these tie beams have in each one of them an empty brace mortise and an empty post mortise on their lower side. Some have short posts that are still in place, others have disappeared, and it's something that hasn't ever been properly explained. There is conjecture as to whether it was a mistake or a miscalculation. They were designed to look like the lower picture, and we will not know ever for certain whether they were put in and then removed. But we do know that as part of the other works in the journey, the first flying buttress that was remodeled by the masons contained what appeared to be a smaller flying buttress inside it, and it had been reconsidered during construction to make it stronger. And it would appear from looking at these two drawings that the original idea for the clear story wall, it's too thin to bear the huge vaulting that stretches over here in the construction of the cathedral. And one of the things about being around these structures for this amount of time, it's a privilege to be able to be given the chance to think about them in this way. So that pretty much sums up the works to the aisles. The campaign took more or less exactly 2 years from start to finish, with a bit of a break for pandemics in between. Other projects that were encompassed by the journey, this is going to be quite speedy because I'm very much aware of the time. This is the Christchurch Gate, as Lian described, on the outside of the precinct, and once again we discovered that it had some extreme pathology present in the timbers of its roof. Also, interestingly, these timbers, the things we were dealing with, and in lots of the things we deal with repairing repairs. So these had historical 17th century repairs onto the main. There's a very small roof with a single spine beam, and it has smaller rafters sloping down from it to form the pitch of the roof. It's very shallow pitch. Once again, we have timber deeply in the masonry, which, as can be seen, has caused it immense problems. So the thing we had to do was simple. We were trying to keep as much of the fabric as possible. I think this roof's been dated to 1520s, something like that. Right, and so the task was, the challenge was to not cut back too much. However, it did go down to this rather canoe-like shape of I think it's just over 6 meters long, the timber in its original state. As you can see, it was much diminished during the works. This was as much as we could leave of the timber that was viable, and everything else had turned to dust. And so this is the chronology of this repair. Once again, in collaboration with Sarah and Lian, a repair was devised. I was going to say, Sarah, would you like to say something about this?
I was just going to say a couple of things. I think one point we noted was that the sort of rapid degradation of the later repair compared to the original timbers, and the quality of timber was a factor. And the second of this was kind of on thinking about coming back to it in the future, and there was a kind of question that was put to me on how can we get back and tighten the bolts. So quite a big debate, maybe disproportionately big debate on how we actually approach the fixings on this, so that in time we could come back and tighten them. And actually what we have found is there has been the need to come and do that with some initial shrinkage and just perhaps a slight deflection as the structure's reloaded and taken its form. And so that's been really quite a key part of what we were thinking about there.
Thank you, Sarah. And that was completed in 21, wasn't it? Is that right? So, and there's the completed underside of the roof with new oak boarding to replace that, which was degraded as well. Moving swiftly on, the picture that graced the cover of this talk was the Northwest Transept, and it was noticed that it's an unusual roof. It's like a hybrid roof with very, very large arch collar braces and no tie beams other than what's above and scissor bracing. This brace had become detruded, and luckily, because of the enthusiasm of the people around here, lots of photographs have been taken of this roof over the years, and we could compare that. We could actually trace that in 2018 it was in its place, and last summer it was dramatically dropped. It happens to rest above a bit of the vaulting above the martyrdom where Thomas Becket was murdered, that is particularly fragile, and there was concern that it might actually drop out because it was close to the toe of its tenant. It would have been an unusual thing, but it's quite an unusual thing to see a brace of this size shear 3 pegs, which implied an enormous amount of force in place. So it gave, once again, I'm going to turn over to Sarah. It gave Sarah a lot to think about in how this might have come about.
Yeah, I think this was a good, it's a very kind of simple thing where you know, you need the good eye of a carpenter to help you out. Just, you know, sort of simply said, well, can't we just put it back again? But of course we can't, because actually the roof has shifted, and you can sort of see in the bottom of the right hand picture we have monitoring on the cathedral as a whole, movement monitoring, and indeed a monitor on the crack there. And we could look at that as part of the overall picture, and that helped us to understand that we felt it wasn't that any of the masonry had moved, but it was in fact a movement in the timber structures as a whole. And we could see that reflected back through the trusses and some of the stress in the joints. And what we could also see was, looking again at the series of change, that the wall plate on the east side had been replaced at some point with concrete, and a recent 2015 campaign of repairs have put that back in as timber. But what it hadn't done is quite matched with what was still extant on the west side, where the two wall plates were tied together. Maybe if we flick through the next slide. I don't know if you want to say something on this one. Oh no, I don't. Go back to the last one. The other kind of point to make is it's easy to say what you need to do. It's quite a different thing to get up there and actually carry out the repair. So again, there's no external scaffold on this part that we could use for access. So everything had to be kind of brought up with. Well, there wasn't too much detail for here, but essentially minimising the scaffold was absolutely key. So there wasn't the opportunity to bring in large amounts of scaffold and bridge across. And as you can see from the picture, there's absolutely no chance of bridging from underneath. And what we didn't want to do was load directly onto the tops of the vaults either. So we developed a very light working scaffold in the vault cone itself, just for essentially, you know, the carpenters to get up and reach the brace. So yeah, again, access being the kind of key point there. Sorry, that was it from me there.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. And so there's the finished repair with its new pegs in. So we had to recut the brace into the slightly new configuration of the principal rafter in relation to the collar tie. And also try and address some of the roof is extremely mobile, and address its movement in other places by the reinforcement of these ashlar posts in here, and redressing. It's very heavily repaired in the past. There's rather large patches on here, which we, to our astonishment, weren't particularly well fixed. So it was part of our task to do some remediation there. Moving on to current times, this is the Trinity Chapel project, which came about at the end of last year, and we started. It's, as Lian explained, it was a recovery funded project under an extraordinarily condensed time frame, and on the it's another roof. It's above extraordinarily, even for an exceptional place of significance. It's above extraordinarily exceptional significance, which is the 12th century choir of Canterbury Cathedral. It's a Victorian roof replacing one that was burnt down in 1872. Interestingly detailed to probably resemble the roof which it replaced, but in true Victorian style, it's massively overbuilt. However, it has been subject to chronic water ingress, as all the roofs of these great places are, and it was in a state of decay that warranted a kind of an emergency program. And so I think the next picture indicates some of the pathology that we found there, as you can see. So it's an unspecified pine, probably from Scandinavia. It's kind of impossible to tell too closely from surveys. We elected collectively to replace it with Douglas fir, which is fantastically resistant to well, not fantastic, it's resistant to corrosion, and is also very, very stable. And so this project was termed the Trinity Wall Plates project, which, other than the odd now another beam that's, I think it's a slight misnomer to call these hammer beams, isn't it? That it does a similar task to a hammer beam. This one here was replaced. I think there's a picture of actually in situ repairs. So there's a replacement new hammer beam. Some of our temporary supporting in place, which very, very conveniently for us had been left up in the roof, which are these very large steels. In actual fact, to carry out the works that we did, and I think they'd been up there for 30 years waiting for the project to be undertaken. Which leads us on to the last thing they're talking about, which is the project that I think pretty much finished today, the bulk of it on Friday, which is the crossing next to the 12th century choir, known as the presbytery. Is the scene of probably the largest timbers at Canterbury, which is that these diagonal rafters are approximately 18 metres long, and it's hard to gain the scale of them when there's not people in the picture, that they are truly enormous. And at the driving of the structural engineer, it revealed that we're in more trouble than we'd sort of imagined, really. That the bearings on some of them had completely gone under the posts. It's a structure that shares its loading between the wall top and a small corbel. If I go back, there's a small corbel on the masonry down there, so the posts bear onto that, and the hammer beams run onto the wall top, where they are met by the principal rafters. It's a structure that relies on sharing these loads, and through the years, it's also these diagonal rafters are directly underneath the valleys of the transepts where they meet the main body of the cathedral, and it's the recipient of a very large watershed. Over the years, it's leaked, probably not spectacularly, but its resulting decay to the timbers is fairly spectacular. The north side has been historically repaired with steel plates that have held it up this long. However, the water ingress has continued, and the decay to the timbers has moved inboard of the steel plates, thus making them start to not do their job, which was in evidence by, I don't know if you can see this picture here. This is a large flake of stone that has spalled off underneath the bearing of a hammer beam fairly recently, indicating that the load is huge on it. One of the very particular problems with this project is that the loadings are so big and the fabric beneath is so valuable, there is no chance of propping once again off the vaulting. And in order to support these timbers from above, it would necessitate a scaffold bigger than is presently affordable. So it gave everyone a lot of head scratching to do as how we might affect temporary support to affect these repairs. And the design and thinking into the repairs was perhaps not one of this great longevity, which is perhaps more of one that we could make it last for 20 to 60 years until the roof is done, which it probably will be. There's a quinquennial, which is a 5-yearly report describing it to be done, isn't it, around 20 years? So it will be looked at in 20 years. So this is to be considered. However, and in the head scratching around it, so there's Sarah's and my collective head scratching, talking about how we might go about holding these things up. And in the end, we kind of did all of it. Each truss ended up having a slightly different repair put in to stabilize it. And let's move on quickly to the pictures of the repairs. So these are the north side with this very substantial triangulation inside each truss, and this is the south side, which is a slightly more elegant repair, which is certainly more carpented. And yes, this was perhaps the most pleasurable of all the projects that we worked on in a great sea of pleasurable projects. And that's the last slide.
So we're about 10 minutes over time, I think,
Oh.
because we had all of the
Yes.
fact,
The technical hit.
all the technical issues at the beginning, which was down to my amazing IT abilities. But if everybody hasn't fallen asleep, then I guess we'll stop sharing there and yeah, leave it there. If anyone's got any questions, then do say.
Excellent. Excellent.